Well, we are stepping into a moment of massive importance in the life and ministry of Jesus. And if you've been following along with us in the Gospel of Mark, you know that the Gospel breaks roughly in half. And the first half of the Gospel of Mark is really answering the question, who is this man? Who is he? And we watch Jesus cast out demons, heal diseases, calm storms, and all the time people are asking, who is this man? Who does this kind of thing? And in the first part of Mark kind of culminates in chapter 8, where Jesus asks the question of his disciples, who do you think I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah. You are God's chosen instrument, the hero of his human story. And they get his identity right. And once they get his identity right, the back of the book shifts to focus on, if that's his identity, the Messiah, now let's talk about his activity. What is he here to do? And in Mark chapter 8, Jesus starts to tell them, hey, I'm going to Jerusalem, and the chief priests and elders there will reject me, they will kill me, I will die, and then I will rise. And he tells them that, and then for the next 2 chapters, 9 and 10, he just starts walking towards Jerusalem. And as he's doing it, he's saying, when we get there, I will be rejected, killed, but I won't stay dead. And we watched him march towards his fate, teaching his disciples on the way, and now we arrive at this critical moment where Jesus is on the edge of Jerusalem, about to walk in. If you're following the book, up to this point, Mark 1 through 10 covers about 3 years, a little more, of Jesus' life. The rest of the book, over 1/3, will cover 1 week. It's all been leading up to this, Jesus of Nazareth entering the holy city. And yet, as we look at it, if we're honest, I think for many of us, a modern audience, we look at what Jesus does here and it doesn't make a lot of sense. Just if we're real, I don't know that you were profoundly moved by it. You're like, okay, let me get this straight. If I understand what you were reading, Jesus rides into town, and then when he gets there, it's late, so he walks back out. Okay, I don't understand what all that was about. And then there's the donkey. And there's like 7 verses about donkey procurement. And you're like, I don't understand why this is so valuable to people. Why are we talking about this? And yet the people in the crowd there start yelling in another language and waving shrubbery. And you're like, I'm just not following this. I'm certainly not moved by it. And this is one of those challenging things for us where there's some cultural gaps, and symbolism is only valuable to us if we understand what it symbolizes. Like I remember I watched the coronation of King Charles, and I was watching it on TV, and there was a moment where they hand him a ball with a cross on the top. And I remember I was following along online, and as they handed him that, this kind of orb with a cross, all these people online were commenting like, is that the holy hand grenade from Monty Python and the Holy Grail? You know, they're like, what is that thing? And I'm like, I don't know what that is. And so I think it's a little silly. I'm not moved by it. And then the little commentator that's whispering like, oh, he's being given the orb. And you're like, okay, what does that mean? And he says, the orb is a picture of the world, and the cross on top is a symbol of Jesus. And what that says to the king by him offering that is to say, hey, you may be king of this country, but there's a king over you. That you are not an ultimate authority. You are under authority and accountable to it. You are not the head of all things. You submit to a greater king. That should bring some humility to your office and accountability to it. It was a symbol of humility as I realized there's a king who's over all kings. And once I saw that, I'm like, ooh. And I went from like, that's weird to like, ooh, I like that orb. That orb rocks, right? Because I understand the symbolism. We've talked about that before. If I told you a story and I said, hey man, over the break, a buddy of mine, he took his girl to Rose's Luxury, and then they went on a walk among the monuments at night, and then he got on a knee and held up a box that was covered in black velvet, and there was a jewelry inside. You would go, oh wow, because you know what I'm talking about. Hey, this guy proposed marriage, that I want to bind myself together with you to be a husband, and you my wife for until death do us part, that this was a covenant of love being expressed. But if you lived on an island somewhere in a different culture, all those things, I don't know what Rose's Luxury is, I don't know what the monuments are, and I don't know why you're handing out jewelry, you would miss the significance of the moment because you don't understand the symbols. And so here, this moment, we've got a bit of cultural gap. So I could preach this at you, yell it at you. I just kind of want to teach it to us, because what Jesus is doing in this moment is Jesus is grabbing some profound cultural symbols, and he's grabbing them to make a declaration to the city. A declaration like a proposal. I want to love you and I want to lead you. What he's saying to them with all this pageantry is, I am the king, and I want you to receive me as such. This is Jesus dropping all cloak and pretense and declaring in no uncertain terms, I am the king and I want to be your king. Not just theirs back then, but ours too. So we need to understand what this is about, what he's doing here, because this triumphal entry is what it's called, is a declaration of authority. And what we're going to see is it's going to show us who he is and what he can do, why he can do it, and how he's going to do it. We're going to see that he is the true king that can transform us. But we need to understand why in the midst of all these symbols. And so I read so many commentaries on how to explain this to you, but I got to tell you honestly, in the midst of all that, Dr. Tim Keller, his categories of how to explain what's happening were so helpful. So I won't preach his sermon, but I will use his categories. And here they are. He says of Jesus that he is the true king, he's the transformational king, the paradoxical king, the confrontational king. Such great titles. The true king, the transformational king, the paradoxical king, and the confrontational king. We're watching the king enter the holy city. So we understand it. Let's look at the fact that he's the true king. And his declaration begins with geography. You saw it in verse 1. It says, now when they drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethpage and Bethany, at the Mount of Olives. Bethany was a small town on the outskirts of Jerusalem. It was a suburb, right? It's like Alexandria. Or technically it was on the east of Jerusalem, so it'd be like Hyattsville. And he chooses that as his staging ground, right? And you can look at that, and it's on the slope of a mount, the Mount of Olives. So from that little town, you can overlook all of Jerusalem. Why is he staging here? Well, there's something significant about that place. In Ezekiel, the prophet in the Old Testament, Ezekiel starts to tell a story to God's people. He says, do you remember how you were birthed as a nation? He said, you were like an abandoned baby, left out on the road in your blood. And God says, I came upon you and found you, and I cried, live! And I took you, and I brought you home, and I fed you, and nursed you, and raised you, and then when you became of age, I married you. I entered a covenant of love with you. God says, that's a picture of what I did with you as a nation, the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. And he said, and once I did that, you took all the blessings I gave you, and rather than blessed to be a blessing, you became selfish. Spent all that blessing on your own comforts. Became radically in pursuit of your own pleasures, to the point that you began to entertain other pagan deities, and to the point where you began to sacrifice your children on the altar to foreign gods. And God said, when you did that, I said, enough. I can't bless that. And so in Ezekiel chapter 11, Ezekiel gets a vision of God's glory filling the temple in the center of Jerusalem. And then he sees God's glory leave the temple. I can't bless rebellion like this. And he leaves the temple out of the eastern gate. And then it says in verse 23 of Ezekiel 11, and the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood on the mountain that it's on the east side of the city. He watches the glory of God leave through the eastern gate and up onto the eastern mountain. God's glory is leaving, and then judgment comes. And if you read the Old Testament, the people of God go into exile. And as tragic as it sounds, at the end of the book in Ezekiel 43, Ezekiel gives them some hope. He says, hey, there will be a day where God will redeem you. God will bring you back. God will rescue you. And then he sees a vision. Ezekiel again, he says, the Spirit led me to the gate facing to the east. And behold, the glory of God of Israel came back from the east. And the sound of his coming was like the sound of many waters. The earth shone with his glory as the glory of the Lord entered the temple by the gate facing east. The Spirit lifted me and brought me into the inner court. And behold, the glory of the Lord filled the temple. This was the day they were waiting for. The prophet Zechariah said, the feet of the Messiah will touch down on the holy mountain to the east of Jerusalem. The Messiah's feet are touching the mountain. The glory of God is coming down from the east, returning to his people so that the temple can be filled with the glory of the Lord. Jesus grabs this imagery and says the glory of God is coming into the city. Now, some of you may hear that and you go, wow, that's a lot to infer from geography. Are you sure Jesus was doing that? Are you sure Bethany just wasn't the last place to get snacks before you entered the city? Like that's a lot. Well, I want you to notice also the intentionality of Jesus' entrance, that we move from geography to animal husbandry. If you've been following along in Mark, you see that much of what Jesus does is in some ways a reaction to other people. Someone's blind and says, I need help, so he heals them. People are hungry, so he miraculously feeds them. That he's often reacting to other people as he progresses through his ministry. And yet here, did you notice? He's purposeful. You're going to go in that city, you're going to find that donkey, you're going to do this. Like suddenly he's got a vision and it has to be just like this. So even if you don't understand the symbolism, you understand Jesus has a vision. Whatever he's doing it on purpose. And we get a lot of energy aimed at this little animal. And you see it says in verse 2, Jesus sent two of his disciples, and he said to them, go into the village in front of you. Immediately as you enter it, you'll find a colt tied on which no one's ever sat. Untie it and bring it. And if anyone says to you, why are you doing this? Say, the Lord has need of it, and we'll send it back here immediately. And they went away and found a colt tied at a door outside the street. They untied it, and some of those standing there said, what are you doing untying that colt? And they told him what Jesus said, and they let him go, and they brought the colt to Jesus, and they threw the cloaks on, and he sat on it. That's a lot about donkey procurement. What is going on here? Well, Jesus has a vision, and this would stand out to you. I don't know if you've noticed this, but Jesus walked everywhere, right? Jesus, as a good practicing Jew, would go to the city of Jerusalem multiple times. John tells us that. He would always walk. All the pilgrims walked. Jesus walked everywhere. You don't ride. It's interesting, though, and Jesus in this moment tells his disciples, hey, I'm riding in. That's different. And they understood there's symbolism to that. They're going to understand that. A triumph was like a parade, and it was given to somebody who has authority and is coming in as a king or a conquering hero to receive the adulation from the people. And you would mount up on a white horse or in a chariot pulled by a white horse, and you would ride through the center of the city, and the people would celebrate you as their conqueror or their king, and you would ride up to the temple and participate in sacrifice. Jesus stands at the edge of the city and looks at his disciples and says, boys, I'm riding in. And they were like, okay. And people understand it. That's why they start yelling, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the kingdom of David. They understand he's making a declaration. You're the king. And he's controlling this. He didn't just get tired and say, let's call a donkey Uber. He's purposing this. This is a statement to the people. And then he says, on one which no one's ever sat, which we'll talk about more in the later. But in holy sacrifices, if you were to sacrifice an animal, it had to be an animal that's holy, was never used for common purpose. He said, pick an animal that's never been used for something common. This is a particular moment. And he says, tell them if they ask that the Lord needs it, which Jesus up to this point has never called himself. Son of Man, which is a little bit mysterious. And now he says, go get the donkey. And when they ask why, tell them the Lord needs it. That's different language. He's declaring the king has come to his city. It's interesting. In Genesis 49, all the way back at the beginning of your Bible, there's a prophecy over Judah, the tribe. And it says in Genesis 49:10, the scepter, that means the ruling staff, will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. And then it says, until tribute comes to him, or some translated, until Shiloh. Or another way to say that was, hey, the scepter will never depart from the tribe of Judah until it lands in the hand of him to who it belongs. And then the next verse talks about how he will ride a little colt, a donkey. That all through God's lineage, beginning in Genesis, we've been waiting for a hero to crush the head of the serpent, to rescue us like Moses. And we've been waiting for this man. And there's a king that's coming from, and the scepter will pass on through history until it arrives in the hands of him who it belongs, and he will tie his colt to the vine. And here Jesus says, the scepter is coming to the right hands. Go get me a donkey, right? And as he rides in, they understand what he's doing. In 2 Kings, people did this to Jehu. When they understood a king is riding in, if they didn't have a red carpet to roll out, you took your cloak and you sort of made a red carpet. And so they take off their best, most expensive garment and lay it on the road. My best is fit for your animal to trample on. They make a red carpet and they declare, here comes the king, right? And he's doing this and he's declaring to us, I am the king. And they begin to quote the Psalm 118, which is a messianic psalm that declares, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. They're saying, not just the king of Jerusalem's here, not just the king of Israel's here, the Christ, the Messiah, the son of David who will sit on the throne forever, the one to whom the scepter belongs, the king above all kings, the king over all time is the one who's riding in here. Not just their king, but our king, the king. He is the true king we've all been waiting for, has just arrived. Now, let me pause and preach a little bit here. We want this. There's something in us that longs for heroic leadership. We do. Just watch where your money goes towards movies. How rarely does it go towards what the critics tell us we're supposed to like? All the movies that win the Academy Awards that are about something sad and heartbreaking, right? That ends in death. And we're like, I know I'm supposed to appreciate the art of it, but Give me a hero that when everything's bad comes in and takes over and wrecks shop, but does it in a good way. Give me the Matrix or the Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or the Avengers, or give me Rey in Star Wars. Give me somebody that's gonna step in. Give me a courageous Captain America. Somebody take over and take charge and bring peace. Bring me a noble Black Panther. The right person sits on the throne in Wakanda, right? Give me the chosen one, Harry Potter, who will lay his life down for Hogwarts. Give me the return of the king, that Aragorn will step out of the shadows and take his rightful place. We have collectively spent billions on the same story over and over again. Why do we do it? Because deep in our DNA is the longing for a true king, a heroic king. It's a memory trace. We were meant to be looking for the king. And so we keep telling his story over and over again in different versions. And what Jesus is doing here is saying, the one you've been waiting for is here. It's me. I'm the king. I'm the true king you've been waiting for. Bob Dylan sang it. You're gonna serve somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you're gonna serve somebody. All of us are gonna look for someone to emulate, someone to rescue us from our weaknesses, someone to help us ascend to the places we can't get on our own. All of us are looking for somebody to follow, somebody to serve, someone who will bless us. We're all looking for somebody. You're gonna serve somebody, and many of us serve bad gods that will leave us. And here Jesus says, that longing in you is good, and it's meant to be placed on me. There's a comfort in that, and there's a fear in that. Because some of us hear that and go, yeah, I need a hero. Lord, help me. Thank you, Jesus. And some of us go, oh. King means control. I don't want to be controlled. I don't want someone telling me what to do. And you fear the loss of control. I remember when I took over Breakaway, we had a board of directors, and I just noticed in myself, as someone from a divorced home, I had kind of this fear of authority, and whenever the board came, I like took an adversarial posture of like, you better not tell me what to do. Nobody's boss of me. And I was like, these guys want nothing more than to bless me and help me. They're trying to resource me and encourage me. And I had to realize over time, like, oh, their character saved me from my fear of control. It was easy to step under them as a board because I trusted their heart. And so he's the true king, whether you like it or not. But look at his character. He's not just the true king, he's the liberating king. His ruling power does something beautiful to you. And you go, where are you getting that from? I'm getting it from that little donkey. What happens when you jump upon an unridden animal? If you just leap onto an unridden horse, does it look back and go, where to, master? Let me tell you, no, it doesn't. I grew up in Texas, and I remember as a kid doing this with a young cow. I just thought, you know what, cowboy, I'm gonna ride a cow. And I jumped onto this animal, and I watched its little eyeballs go wide, and it was like, and began to run, buck, and then just ran my legs straight into the barbed wire to do anything to hurt me, to get me off, right? And here Jesus takes an unridden colt through a screaming crowd. If you're gonna ride an animal that will keep its composure, what do you have to do? You break it. You gotta break in a horse so that it can be controlled by you. Jesus doesn't break this donkey. It's an unridden colt, and yet when he gets on it, it rides in peace, even through the screaming crowd. How did he do that? Because he didn't break it, he healed it. He liberated it from its fear. I love the way one commentator said it. He says, in the midst of the excited crowd, an unbroken animal remains calm under the hand of the one who calmed the sea. Isaiah chapter 11, Isaiah the prophet said this about the Messiah. The shoot will spring up from the stem of Jesse. That was David's dad. Out of David's lineage will come a king. And then it says, and here's what he'll do. He says, when he comes, the wolf will dwell with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the young goat. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as water covers the sea. He's not just the king over people. He's the king over all nature. He's a transformational king. And he'll make former enemies peaceful with one another. I love the way George Whitefield said it. He says, look at the animal kingdom. Why do they growl? Why do they run? And he said, because they know you have a quarrel with their maker. That in Genesis 3, when our relationship with God broke, our relationship with the world broke, right? Animals will flee from you, snap at you. Why? Because they're smart. Because they know they can't trust you. And yet, what does God do? When the Messiah comes, even the unbroken animal is at peace in the midst of the raging crowd, right? I love the way Tim Keller said it. He said, this little colt is fearless in the face of a screaming crowd when Jesus is in the saddle of his life. Many of you are wondering, how do I handle the chaos? How do I handle the difficulty? I read a book yesterday with my daughter. We were at Barnes & Noble having a little daddy-daughter date, and we were looking at all these books about the bad seed and the good egg and the big cheese, all these metaphors with, little food, animated food. And the good egg was trying to be good. And yet when all the bad eggs were being chaotic around him, he internalized that anxiety and his shell began to crack. And so he realized the stress is breaking me. And so you go, how is he going to solve it? And what the good egg does is has a spa day, says, I'm going to meditate a little bit. I need to just not worry about all the badness in the world. And I need to take some me time. The end. And I remember reading the book and I was like, yeah, good luck with that. You get enough fire in the world, a spa day ain't going to solve it, right? And yet many of us, when we see the chaos in the world, your shell is breaking, right? What do you need? You need a king who will come and transform you, who can reform what's broken. You need a king who will come and make the chaos in the world right again. And the unbroken colt is at peace in the hands of a king like that. Do you see it? Now, why can he do that? I love this title. Because he's the paradoxical king, right? And you go, what does that mean? Well, I love this because in a Roman triumph, it was a huge parade. And you brought in all your spoils of victory, and you took a white horse and a gold-covered chariot and a purple robe, and you rode in all your glory so that people could marvel at you. And Jesus comes in and says, I'm not just a Roman king, I'm the king of all kings. And so he looks at his disciples and says, I'm riding in. And they understand, okay, man, it's on, let's go. He's riding in, let's go. And Jesus is like, I'm riding in, behold my steed. And he gets on a pollo, a little donkey. Matthew tells us that a bigger donkey was available. That Jesus tells them, pass that one, get the little one. He rides a steed fit for a hobbit. I'm the king of all kings. And you're like, what are you doing? Like if you're an image consultant, you go, you're never going to win an election this way. Like this is, the optics of this are terrible. You can't do it like this, right? And yet he's making a statement. He purposefully juxtaposes majesty and meekness, power and weakness. And incidentally, he's doing it also to fulfill prophecy. But listen to the prophecy. Matthew quotes it to us in Matthew 21. He says, this took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, gentle, mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden. That centuries before, it was quoted by Zechariah, your king will come on a donkey. Now, to give you context in Zechariah 9, it's fascinating. Zechariah 9 is a prophecy concerning Alexander the Great, long before he ever came. And in Zechariah speaks, he talks about a great king coming from the north and wrecking shop of city after city as he makes his way inevitably down to Jerusalem. And as you read the passage of him marching south, it is terrifying. In verse 2 of Zechariah 9, he goes to Tyre, the great city on the shore, and it says that Tyre, the city, will be scraped off and thrown into the sea. It will become a place for the casting of nets. And you go, that's impossible. There's no way. And yet centuries later, when Alexander the Great showed up, the people of Tyre saw him destroying cities. They escaped to a little island off the shore, so they thought he can never reach us here. So what did he do? He smashed their city, made a land bridge, and went out to that place and killed them all. And you realize he just fulfilled Zechariah 9. Alexander the Conqueror is coming. And then you see in verse 5, he gets to the Philistine plain. He destroys Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron. He moves from north to south, taking over city after city. Impending doom is coming. A relentless army is going to get you. It would be like us reading it and going, Boston has fallen. New York is no more. The mighty Baltimore has been compromised. And on it goes. Yea, Silver Spring is in his hands. And then Zechariah prophesies, but then your king will come and says, I will camp around my house because of this army, and I will protect it. The interesting thing is, historically, as Alexander showed up at Jerusalem, a rabbi walked out to meet him and showed him Zechariah 9, and it freaked Alex out. And so he was like, leave the city, boys. And he didn't touch it. And God protected his city. But then what's interesting is Zechariah takes that moment and says, hey, but let me tell you something. Rejoice, daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming. Not a conqueror, not someone to devastate you. You know what your king's like? He has salvation in his hand. He's gentle. He's gentle with you. And he will come mounted on a donkey, even a colt, the foal of a donkey. The king over all kings does not crush you. He's gentle with you. How can he transform you? How can he take away your anxieties? How can the arrival of an authority be good news in your life and not bad news? Because the king with all authorities is gentle with his children. That's the idea. That's our king. He comes on a donkey. Jonathan Edwards was preaching a sermon on Revelation 5. Revelation 5 holds a dichotomy like that too. It's about the end of time, and John is getting these visions, and one of the elders says to him, stop weeping, behold the Lion of the tribe of Judah, which is the name of Jesus. They say, behold the Lion of Judah, the root of David. He is overcome and able to open the book. And then I saw between the throne and the elders a lamb standing as if slain. The elders in heaven tell him, hey, look at the lion. And he looks and he sees a lamb. He's like, wait a minute. How is the king, how is the Messiah both lion and lamb? And Jonathan Edwards says this about him. A lion excels in strength and in majesty of his appearance and voice. A lamb excels in meekness and is sacrificed for clothing and food. Jesus Christ is both, because the diverse excellencies of both lion and lamb wonderfully meet in him. Indeed, there is in Jesus Christ a conjunction of such truly diverse excellencies as otherwise would be utterly incompatible in the same subject. So they do meet in Christ infinite highness and infinite accessibility, infinite justice, yet infinite grace, infinite glory, yet infinite humility, infinite majesty, but transcendent meekness, absolute sovereignty, yet perfect submission, infinite all-sufficiency in himself, yet entirely trusting in independence on God. He is a lion, he is a lamb, he is a rock, he is a pearl, he's a mighty captain, he's a tender lover, he's a fragile flower, he's the mighty tree of life. That's your king, that he comes in power to rule his people, but he doesn't meet us with his power, he meets us with his love. What's interesting is he does what kings are supposed to do in a triumph. You ride through the adulating crowd and you come into the temple to observe it. And you either offer sacrifices there or you wreck shop. And we'll find out next week, he's gonna go bananas in the temple. That's next week. But what's interesting is he's gonna set up shop in the temple. He's going to take over the temple on the week of Passover. We just sang about Passover. What was that? It was the great story of rescue for the people of God in the Old Testament. That when they were enslaved in Egypt, God said, hey, rescue is coming. And they're like, thank God. He's like, I'm going to send the angel of death to destroy injustice. And they were like, yeah, destroy injustice. But then as they do that, they're like, wait a minute, but we have some injustice in us too. How much injustice? Like, just their injustice, not ours? Is there like an ethnic boundary? Like, how are we doing this, God? And God says, no, I'm destroying all sin. And yet, even though payment is coming because of sin, you can sacrifice a lamb, put its blood on the sides and on the top of your doorpost. And it's an image that a lamb will take the hit for you so judgment passes by. And so by faith, they put themselves under the blood of the lamb, that when judgment comes, it passes them by. We want justice, and yet we also want mercy. How do you get both? Jesus rides in at Passover and shuts the thing down. We're not sacrificing lambs. This is the Passover. We're supposed to symbolically sacrifice these lambs to cover us. Where is the Passover lamb? And the answer at the end of this week is, he's here. He's here. The great king will give all. That Paul in 1 Corinthians will say, Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. He will bring the judgment of God, the justice we long for against all sin. And yet he manages to find a way to save sinners in the process by saying, I will judge evil. I will rid this world of it. And yet I've made a way to save you. How does he do it? Sin is servants putting themselves in the place of the king. Salvation is the king putting himself in the place of the servant. I love the way John Stott says it. He says the essence of sin is substituting ourselves for God. So the essence of salvation is God substituting himself for us. We claimed prerogatives that belong to him alone. So he accepts the penalty that belongs to us alone. This is Christianity, that we are so bad that Christ must die for us. That's the only way. But we are so loved that he will on purpose ride into the holy city, knowing I, the Lion of Judah, will become the Lamb who is slain, and from my blood purchase men and women from every tribe and every tongue and every nation. That's our king. That's what he's like. And yet not only is he a transformational king, he's a confrontational king. This ride is a declaration. You have to deal with me. He doesn't slip into town. He rides in and takes over. He shuts down the activity of the day. One of the other Gospels records that the leadership at the time says the whole city's gone out to him. They all came out to recognize and to worship the king. So Jesus is a confrontational king. You have to deal with me. Sin is so bad, it brings judgment, but my sacrifice is so sufficient, it can save all, including you. I love the way Conor McGregor said it when he entered the UFC and got his first win. They're like, congratulations, welcome to the UFC. And he grabbed the mic and said, I didn't come here to take part. I came here to take over. And that's exactly what Jesus came to do. I didn't come to be a nice prophet. I didn't come to be a good rabbi. I didn't come to be a sweet guy that accidentally tripped and stumbled and got martyred. No, I'm coming on purpose. You have to deal with me. And so in verse 8, they spread their cloaks on the road. That's what they did with Jehu when they announced in 2 Kings, you are the king. And they spread their leafy branches that they had cut from the fields. It's a longer story than we have time for here, but these were nationalistic symbols from the Hasmonean period. This is saying, hey, you are the king setting up your dynasty. That's what these palm branches symbolized. And then those who went before him and those who followed were shouting, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna was a combination of two words. Hoshiana, save us. And it was a plea. God save us. God save us. God rescue us. That became a shout of adulation. God will save us. God will save us. It became a shout of triumph in the Old Testament. It was part of the Psalms that you would sing on the way to the Passover. It was a declaration that one day God will bring his king, a descendant from the great King David, and he will come and bring justice and righteousness to the world. They were waiting for the prophetic son of David to come, and as they surround Jesus, they say, he's here. The Messiah we've waited for since Genesis is here. This is the one. Hosanna. Blessed is he who comes to establish the kingdom of David. They're calling him the Messianic king. That's a big deal. You're claiming divine prerogative in here. That Jesus beforehand had been a little bit secretive, been a little bit cagey. Demons would cry out, you're the Holy One of God. He's like, shh, not yet. And yet now he's thrown off the cloak and said, the real king is here. And he's forcing the leadership to deal with him. You have to deal with me. I'm saying I'm the king. That's the story with Bartimaeus at the beginning. Jesus healed a lot of blind people. Why do we tell this story? Because this guy is sitting there blind, and when he hears Jesus going by, he doesn't say rabbi like the rich young ruler. He doesn't say teacher. He doesn't say prophet. He says, son of David, have mercy on me. And so some in the crowd are like, and he goes, son of David. That's the messianic title. I am the hero of God's story. And he says, son of David. And Jesus goes, yeah, what do you need? And everyone in the crowd was like, oh, no, he didn't. He just went ahead and said, yeah, that's exactly who I am. I am the son of David. I am the long-awaited king. Bring me a donkey. I'm riding in. And in triumph, the king arrives, and he's forcing their hand. You have to deal with me. And he will enter Jerusalem. And it says he went into the temple, and he surveyed everything. That wasn't like a tourist, like, wow, look at all these columns. He's surveying it like an owner. Actually, the prophet Malachi predicted this. It says, see, I will send my messenger who will prepare my way before me. Then suddenly the Lord you are seeking will come into his temple. The messenger of the covenant whom you desire will come, says the Lord Almighty. But who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? For he will be like a refiner's fire and a launderer's soap. You're longing for the king to come, but when he comes, get ready, because he will cleanse the temple. That's next week. And yet they were quoting from the Psalms. And in this very psalm they were quoting, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. The next verse is, the Lord is God. He's made his light to shine upon us. Bind the festal sacrifice with cords up to the horns of the altar. What's interesting is the crowd is more true than they know. They're shouting, blessed is the Son of David, because they say, here is the nationalistic king who will throw off the oppression of Rome and give us independent leadership. And they will become disappointed when Jesus doesn't do that. And Jesus, we understand, is fighting a bigger fight. He said, I'm not here to throw away Rome. I'm here to cast off sin, because that's what will send you to hell. I'm coming to fight a bigger fight. And how am I going to do it? Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So bind the sacrifice up to the horns of the altar. He says, I am coming to die for you. The lion will be the lamb whose blood is shed to pay for your sin, so you might be set free, that you can become what you're meant to be. The first coming of Jesus is him coming with grace, him coming as a sacrifice. His second coming will arrive with power. And yet in this moment, he is pushing the issue. I am a confrontational king. I'm not telling you I'm a nice guy. I'm not telling you I'm a motivational speaker. I'm not telling you I'm somebody whose advice you can take or not. I am telling you I am the King of kings, the Lord of lords, the Son of David, the Son of God. The sacrifice you need to be in heaven. So you either crown me or you kill me, but you can't ignore me. And the leadership will decide to kill him because he forces the issue. This is who he is. Bono. From U2. Many of you younger people maybe have never heard of them. They were a band that were big in the 80s and 90s. Bono would frequently do this interviews with this guy from the Rolling Stone magazine. And he did so many that they decided to just do a book together, that he and this interviewer, essayist. And as they were doing this interview, Bono keeps bringing up his faith in Jesus. And every time he does, the interviewer just sort of sidesteps it, jukes it, steps around it. And then finally, at one moment, the interviewer interrupts him and says, Christ has his rank among the world's greatest thinkers, but Son of God, isn't that a little far-fetched? So he finally bites, like, hey, he deserves a place among the world's greatest, but Son of God, come on. Heed the words of the prophet Bono. No, it's not far-fetched to me. Look, the secular response to the Christ story always goes like this. He was a great prophet, obviously a very interesting guy, had a lot of things to say along the lines of other great prophets, be they Elijah or Muhammad or Buddha or Confucius. But actually, Christ doesn't allow you that. He doesn't let you off that hook. Christ says, no, I'm not saying I'm a teacher. Don't call me teacher. I'm not saying I'm a prophet. I'm saying I'm the Messiah. I'm saying I'm God incarnate. And people say, no, please, just be a prophet. A prophet we can take. You're a bit eccentric. We had John the Baptist eating locusts and wild honey. We can handle that. But don't mention the M word because, we're going to have to crucify you. And he goes, no. I know you're expecting me to come back with an army and to set you free from these creeps, but actually I am the Messiah. And at this point, everyone starts staring at their shoes and says, oh my God, he's going to keep saying this. So what you're left with is either Christ was who he says he was, the Messiah, or a complete nutcase. I mean, on the level of Charles Manson. The idea that the entire course of civilization for over half the globe could have its fate changed and turned upside down by a nutcase, that, for me, is far-fetched. That's Bono's answer. You either crown him or you kill him. But he's forcing the issue. I'm the king. When my wife and I lived in Dallas when I was a seminary student, she got a job at Starbucks to get us insurance and to pay the bills. She was my sugar mama while I read all these commentaries. And I remember I would go to class all day, and then I would walk over to her coffee shop and sit in there and study, and while she would work, and we got to know all her work friends. And it was great because it was just this massive diversity of humanity in this particular Starbucks. It was awesome. And so she became very good friends with a young Jewish woman from Israel, and became very good friends with this Muslim woman who would come every day waiting for a green card, so she couldn't work. She was a dentist by trade, but she would sit there and just kind of study and read and brush up as she was waiting for her visa. And so I remember coming in one day and seeing my wife sitting with them in their little chairs during her break talking. And it just seemed like the setup of a joke. I walk in, I'm like, a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim walk into a Starbucks. You're like, what is going on here? And they had just all become friends. It was really marvelous to see. And it was fun as we would talk. Obviously, conversations would flow towards religion. And there was one particular day where the Muslim woman and I were sitting together, and she just said, I just love that we can be of different faiths and love each other. And I said, exactly. And she said, I think this is amazing. I said, so do I. And she said, I just think we're all the same. And I'm like, in many ways, yes. And she was like, yes. Like you want to love people. I want to love people. You believe Jesus was a great man. I believe he's a great man. Why can't we just get along? And I said, here's the deal. There's a passage from the Old Testament that Jesus quotes a lot. And he says that he's like a rock. And he says he's like a rock, and he says, you're going to do one of two things with this rock. He said, I'm either the cornerstone, like the stone you build your whole house on, or I'm the stone of stumbling and the rock of offense. He said, you either build your whole life on me, or you trip over me. And I said, it's because he keeps declaring all through the Gospels that he's not just a prophet, he's not just a good man, he's not just a teacher. He claimed to be the Son of God. And as soon as I said that, she went, don't say that. And I went, do you see what just happened? I said, I'm building my life on him. You just tripped over him. I said, now, can we still be friends? Yeah. Because what Jesus teaches me is that I'm infinitely loved by God. And so I can love everybody. The Christian love doesn't just flow to friendships. That's the normal world. You love your friends, you like your acquaintances in the world, just get away from me, leave me alone, right? The gospel says we love all the way out even to our enemies. I said, so Jesus teaches me to love you, and I love you. But I gotta be honest with you, I don't just think he's a nice guy. I don't just think he's a prophet. I don't just think he's a teacher. He's the Son of God, and I'm building my life on him. Because I can't do enough good to earn my way to heaven. I know me too much. I know me too well. But the beauty is, Jesus came not as a crushing king, not as a destroying king, but as a liberating king, to free me from my sin, to free me from its ultimate condemnation. How did he do it? He arrived in our story. He rode in and declared himself our king, but not a crushing king, a transforming king. He doesn't judge me for my sin. He takes its penalty out of the way, and in its place, he brings peace, he brings grace, and he brings life. But he forces the issue. You either crown me or you kill me. And for me, he's my king. And friends, this is where the gospel's going. I love that as we entered into the season in the Lincoln Theater, we've been looking at Jesus. Who is this man? What is he like? And as we've seen it, as he's shown himself throughout the Gospels, you see this guy's more than just a teacher. This is the Son of God who's come for you and me. This is the King of Kings, riding in a humble triumph here, but we're told he will come in a glorious triumph later to set up a kingdom that will never fade. But these are the days of grace. What will you do with this man? Crown him or king him? My hope is that as you learn more about him and you hear about his character, you'll trust his heart and you'll join us in crying, Hosanna. Blessed is he who comes in the name